Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening again. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started, I just wanted to go through a few logistics. We encourage you to use the chat to ask questions in English or French at any time to the group or directly to any of the moderators if you need technical assistance. We'll be using Mentimeter today. You can use this on your phone, tablet, or laptop, and we'll provide instructions on how to access and use Mentimeter in a few minutes. QR codes and links via the chat will be provided throughout the webinar for you to access resources and tools. And the webinar recording, presentation, and those links to the resources will also be shared by email. To get us started, I'm very excited to first turn things over to Lisa Godwin, Deputy Office Director in the Office of Population and Reproductive Health at USAID. Lisa, good morning, and over to you.
Good morning. Thanks, Amanda, and hello, everyone. As Amanda said, I'm Lisa Godwin. I'm the Deputy Office Director in the Office of Population and Reproductive Health at USAID, Washington. But I'm a Foreign Service Officer, and so normally I'm out in the field. And so far I've been posted in Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. So I'm actually quite familiar with some of the work that you've done, and I'm really thrilled to be here with you today. So I'd just like to offer a few opening remarks. Breakthrough Research is USAID's flagship SBC research and evaluation project to drive the generation, packaging, and use of innovative SBC research to inform programming. Implemented from August 2017 until July 2023, Breakthrough Research is led by the Population Council in collaboration with consortium partners, Tulane University, Avenir Health, the Population Reference Bureau, Institute for Reproductive Health at Georgetown University, and Ideas 42. Breakthrough Research also works closely with its sister project, Breakthrough Action, as well as other implementing partners working on SBC and service delivery. The project's approach to foster collaboration and shared learning ensure SBC programs are based in what works, elevate the impact of evidence-based SBC programs, and put evidence into practice. Over the past 6 years of the project, Breakthrough Research has conducted critical and groundbreaking research that is helping to fill evidence gaps in the field of social and behavior change. These include the areas of SBC measurement, provider behavior change, the enabling environment for SBC, and costing. The costing work is particularly exciting, as one of the most common questions our SBC advisors here at USAID relates to the cost and cost effectiveness of SBC approaches. With the work that Breakthrough Research will cover today in their webinar, we now have evidence to help answer that question. As this is the last of Breakthrough Research's 4 legacy events, we want to thank the project for being an important partner for USAID in furthering our support for commitment to achieving improved health and development outcomes through effective SBC, and we are grateful for the contributions of the staff across the entire consortium. One of this project's biggest legacies will be that it has equipped governments, implementing partners, service delivery organizations, and donors with key data and evidence they need to integrate proven, cost-effective social and behavior change approaches into their programs. We are proud to have supported this work and look forward to hearing more of how this work influences others. Back to you, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate those opening remarks. And now turn things over to Laura Reichenbach, the Project Director of Breakthrough Research.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Lisa, for your remarks. I also want to welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Laura Reichenbach, and I'm the Project Director of Breakthrough Research. Breakthrough Research has had a productive 6 years, and I want to share a quick snapshot of a few of our metrics. The project has worked in 19 countries and engaged with 21 global and country partners on 53 research studies. This has resulted in 27 peer-reviewed publications and 94 citations to date across the 4 priority technical areas of the project: provider behavior change, SBC and the enabling environment, advancing SBC measurement, and costing for SBC. Today's webinar is the last of the project's 4 complimentary legacy and learning webinars. These webinars have been intended for programmers, researchers, development partners, and donors, and designed to be an interactive learning opportunity. Welcome back to those of you who joined us for either of our first 3 legacy and learning webinars. The first one focused on provider behavior change and SBC approaches to improving quality of care in family planning. The second on advancing SBC measurement for family planning. And the third on SBC and the enabling environment for family planning. If you missed any of those, you can use the link in the chat to access the recording, resources, and webinar slide deck. For this webinar, we'll highlight evidence, insights, and learnings from the past 6 years from Breakthrough Research's work to gather, analyze, and share evidence on the costs and impact of SBC interventions, making the case that investing in SBC is crucial for improving health, including family planning outcomes. First, we'll start by briefly setting the scene for costing for family planning SBC. Next, through a series of short presentations, we'll share some of Breakthrough Research's state-of-the-art evidence and costing tools you can use that the project has produced over the past 6 years to advance and strengthen costing for SBC programs and SBC approaches in family planning programs. We'll then share a call to action for programmers and implementers, researchers, and donors. What can you, in your role, do next as we look to the future of costing to support family planning programs? I'll now turn it over to Amanda Calamar, the Technical Director for Breakthrough Research.
Thanks so much, Laura. As mentioned at the start, we'll be using Mentimeter throughout today as a way to hear from you during the webinar. If you joined us for a previous webinar in our series, this will be very familiar to you. For those of you that are new to the webinar series today, you can access Mentimeter through your phone or laptop. If you're using your phone, you can use the QR code on the screen. Scanning it will take you directly to our page on Mentimeter. And on your phone or laptop, you can also go to menti.com and enter the code 55716972. And this will also take you to our page on Mentimeter. We'll give everyone a minute to get there. And once you're there, if you can click on the thumbs up on the page it brings you to, that will let us know how many people have successfully connected to Mentimeter. Wonderful. Okay, seeing lots of thumbs up. So I'm going to advance this. If you still need to connect, you can use the link that was just provided in the chat. So first, please let us know where you're joining this webinar from today by placing the blue dot near your geographic location and pressing submit. And then you'll see the results live on the screen here. Wonderful. It's great to see so much participation from such a diverse set of countries. And then see we even have someone very early on the West Coast of the US. So thank you. Thank you for joining. So next, a question to you all to get us started. Have you ever tried to cost your SBC program or SBC approach or conduct cost effectiveness analysis? A pretty even split between yes and no, hovering right around 50-50. So that's great. We have some people with some experience. Hopefully these tools can help strengthen that work. And if you've never tried to cost your program, hopefully the tools we shared today will help you do so in the future so that we can continue to build that evidence base and understand the cost effectiveness of SBC approaches. Great. And so how challenging do you find it to understand the costs or cost effectiveness of your program or SBC approach? You can use the sliding scale to let us know if you find it extremely challenging, not challenging at all, or somewhere in between. Okay, so hovering right in the middle between extremely challenging and not at all challenging. So again, hopefully the resources shared today will help move that scale a little bit more towards less challenging work. And finally, we'd like to know a little bit about who is joining us today. Do you consider yourself to be a program designer or implementer? Are you a researcher or M&E officer? Are you a donor or a stakeholder or policymaker? Great, we have a nice mix of people joining us today, and I think you'll find that there are resources and tools for everyone here on the call today. So with that, let's now set the scene for costing for SBC approaches and family planning and dive into the evidence.
Breakthrough Research's approach to SBC costing has been guided by three grounding pillars. First, synthesize the existing evidence. This has included reviews of the literature related to both costs of SBC approaches and the documented health impact of SBC on a number of outcomes, including family planning, malaria, and nutrition. Second, generate new evidence to fill identified costing and cost-effectiveness evidence gaps. This has included the project's cost-effective analyses of two large integrated SBC programs, one in Niger and one in Nigeria. And the third guiding pillar has been to foster evidence generation by others. We've done this by connecting the community working on or interested in SBC costing, and by developing resources and tools to support implementing partners. Today, we'll be sharing just a selection of our work over the past 6 years, organized around key messages we'd like to leave you with. The links that we provide throughout the webinar can be used to go deeper into the evidence and the tools shared. We'll also share a link at the end of the webinar to a collection of a larger body of Breakthrough Research's work on SBC costing. As a first key message for today, understanding and measuring project costs is important for developing a consistent evidence base for SBC to support family planning programs, inform adaptive management, and ensure continued investments in evidence-based, cost-effective SBC approaches. To dive a little deeper into this key message, we'll highlight some of the evidence that Breakthrough Research has generated over the past 6 years, outlining the importance of SBC costing and the need for strengthened understanding of costs for family planning SBC. You'll hear from those on the Breakthrough Research team involved in developing these resources, and they'll be available at the end of the webinar to answer your questions. First, over to you, Nicole.
Hello, my name is Nicole Bellows. I work at Avenir Health on the Breakthrough Research Project. I'll be talking about our work documenting the costs of SBC interventions for health in low and middle income countries. One key area of our work has been assembling the literature on SBC costs, where we have identified 197 different SBC costing studies. From these studies, we have also seen interesting patterns. When looking across health areas, the greatest proportion of SBC costing studies are in HIV and family planning. Geographically, the studies are primarily based in Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, with few studies from Latin America and the Caribbean, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East and North Africa. For target populations, most studies focused on broad categories, such as women and children, whereas fewer costing studies focus on adolescents, young adults, and other key populations. Most studies examine the costs of traditional communication interventions, and there's less known about the newer forms of SBC, such as social media and other digital technologies. Finally, more than half the SBC costing studies were published prior to 2010, so newer studies are needed to reflect more current costs. When looking at the unit costs, such as the cost per person exposed to or participating in an intervention, we find that the unit costs vary widely. Unit costs vary both within a specific type of intervention, like radio or group IPC, and also between intervention types. Another point of variation is the reporting on the SBC intervention costs, where different methodologies are used and different types of data are examined. This has important implications for comparing the results of different studies. In examining the patterns of SBC unit costs, much of the variation makes logical sense, where interventions that are more intensive and interactive have higher unit costs than one-way communication interventions. You can scan the QR code here to learn more about our work documenting the costs of SBC interventions. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. And next over to Lori to share how the project has made some of these data available to you all to use to inform your own programs.
Hello, my name is Lori Bollinger, and I work at Avenir Health, overseeing the SBC costing and cost effectiveness work. I'll be sharing our work creating the SBC cost repository. We have extracted data from 197 SBC costing and cost effectiveness studies from the peer-reviewed and gray literatures and have assembled them into a centralized database. Donors, implementers, and researchers can use this database to assist with planning and budgeting. All of the 197 studies are available in an Excel workbook on the Breakthrough Research website. For studies with SBC unit costs, these data can also be accessed in the searchable Unit Cost Study repository available online. Excel-based repository is a downloadable, filterable workbook of all the reported SBC costs. The repository contains a guide which walks a user through the types of information included, such as intervention details, contextual information, costing information, cost-effectiveness analysis results where applicable, and cost measurement details. All columns can be filtered to view a subset of results. While all cost data have been adjusted to the same year, caution should be taken when comparing results since a variety of costing methodologies and units of analysis are used. To access the SBC cost repository, use the QR code here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lori and Nicole. And now we'd like to hear from you all again using Mentimeter. So if you can please go back to where you left off on Mentimeter, or if you need to rejoin us, you can go to menti.com, enter the code 55716972, or use the QR code to take you to Mentimeter. Great. Thank you for the thumbs up. It looks like people are switching over to Mentimeter. So welcome back. And now that we've heard about our work documenting the costs of SBC interventions, several evidence gaps that Nicole highlighted were identified in the review of the literature. From your perspective, you can use Mentimeter to rank the costing evidence gaps in order of most pressing to least pressing to address. Once you're done ranking, please press submit and you'll see the results live on the screen. Great, this is great feedback, and I see that the number 2, 3, and 4 spots are kind of moving around and changing with each other, but that first spot on the shortage of cost information on newer and rapidly changing forms of SBC remains at the top, and we've done a little bit of work on that you'll hear about in just a minute. So keep Mentimeter close by and we'll use it again in a few minutes. But for now, let's turn back to our next key message.
Investments in SBC for family planning are cost effective. A simple key message with a lot of work behind it. You'll next hear from members of the Breakthrough Research team who will tell us how we know this and what it means for using SBC approaches to support your family planning program. First, over to Michelle.
My name is Michelle Weinberger with Avenir Health. This session examines the business case for investing in social and behavior change, or SBC for short, for family planning. The primary objective of this activity was to leverage prior SBC research to make a case for investments in SBC for family planning. We synthesized the available literature on SBC costs and impacts to estimate the potential cost effectiveness of SBC investments, including various interventions such as mass and mid-media, mobile or SMS interventions, and different types of interpersonal communication approaches. Once the literature was synthesized, we then used the median costs and the median impacts to build a model that can examine the cost effectiveness of the overall field of SBC programs in low and middle income countries. We applied the model to country-specific illustrative investment scenarios to assess the cost effectiveness of SBC investments. We examined illustrative investments in 4 countries: Guinea, Niger, Togo, and Zambia. To determine cost effectiveness, the cost per disability adjusted life year, or DALY, averted was calculated and compared to the GDP per capita in each country. According to WHO choice standards, a cost per DALY averted that is less than 3 times the GDP per capita is considered to be cost effective, and a result that is less than 1 times the GDP per capita is considered to be highly cost effective. As you can see from the final row of this table, in all 4 countries, the illustrative SBC investments were found to be either cost-effective or highly cost-effective in terms of their role to increase modern contraceptive use. In addition to the SBC business case for family planning, there are country briefs available for each of the 4 countries, with French versions available for Guinea, Niger, and Togo. Breakthrough Research also developed 2 additional business cases, one for investing in SBC for malaria and one for investing in SBC for nutrition. Both business case models found that illustrative SBC investments were considered highly cost effective. To learn more about the SBC business case, please scan the QR code.
Thanks, Michelle. And next, back over to Nicole to share how an interactive tool based on this business case is available to you to use in your own programs.
Hello, this is Nicole Bellows, and I'll be talking about the interactive online tool based on the SBC business case for family planning. You can use this tool to help you design potential SBC programs, to understand whether a planned investment will have the intended impact and cost effectiveness, or to adjust potential programming to see what combination of SBC interventions and what intervention reach aligns with your budget and intended impact. The tool guides a user through 6 steps. The first step is to select your country from a list of 31 family planning priority countries. Then you specify the starting year for your 5-year projection and review the model parameters. Next, you can review the SBC impact odds ratios, which is our measure of impact that's based on the synthesis of the literature on SBC and family planning in low and middle income countries. No inputs are required for step 2. The third step is where you review the median unit costs for family planning SBC interventions. Again, no inputs are required for this step. Step 4 is where you specify the intervention reach over the 5-year time frame. This tool has some built-in help features to assess with this particular input. No inputs are required for step 5, but this step helps you sense check the information you entered in step 4 and whether the specified intervention reach is feasible. In this final step, you'll review the impact and cost effectiveness results of the proposed SBC program based on the information that you've entered in the previous steps. A lot of inputs go into the calculation of the impact and cost effectiveness results. Luckily, most of these inputs are already built into the tool, and this minimizes the amount of data you need to bring to the tool in order to generate results. The built-in country-specific data include population data, as well as data on fertility intentions, and the starting modern contraceptive prevalence. It includes method mix, the starting values for the intermediate outcomes of family planning use, such as partner communication, and data related to the maternal deaths, DALYs, and other cost-effective parameters. And finally, media ownership and use via the DHS surveys. Measures of SBC impact and SBC intervention unit costs are also built in based on the literature synthesis among low and middle income countries. But these measures can be adjusted to reflect the known costs or impacts specific to your program if you have that data. Here we are at step 1. In this example, we've selected Ghana as the country. We've selected a national application of the model and a 5-year program to start in 2023 and end in 2027. The main user input to the tool is at step 4, where you specify the number of women reached by SBC interventions, where users can input reach as annual reach for each of the 5 years, or expected reach in the final year, or the cumulative reach over 5 years. Assistance is built into the tool to help you determine your reach for different interventions if needed. When you click on the help feature, it will bring up a display similar to the one you see here, where we've selected the SBC intervention to be radio, and we want to calculate reach by the number of media spots. So we estimate that our program will air 50 radio spots, reaching approximately 10,000 women per spot, and the tool then calculates the reach. The last step is to review the results. While the tool displays a number of different results, 2 key results are the projected increase in MCPR and the estimated cost effectiveness. Here under impact, we see that our SBC investment scenario in Ghana would lead to a 1.4 percentage point increase in MCPR nationally. And here's the second key result, our determination of cost effectiveness. The results calculate the cost per disability adjusted life year, or DALY, averted over the 5-year time frame and compare it to the thresholds for cost effectiveness based on the GDP per capita. In this example, you can see the estimated cost per DALY averted is less than the GDP per capita thus indicating that the investments would be highly cost effective. To build your own investment scenario, scan the QR code here to take you to the tool, the user guide, and the how-to video for using the tool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And now we'll take a few minutes to hear from you all again using Mentimeter. So please go back to where you left off, or if you need to rejoin us, you can go to menti.com, enter the code on your screen, or use the QR code to take you directly to Mentimeter. Great, lots of thumbs up. So thanks for rejoining us on Mentimeter. So now that we've heard about the business case for investing in SBC for family planning, first, a pulse check. Were you surprised to learn that SBC investments for family planning are cost effective? Okay, not a lot of surprise, but hopefully this gives the evidence behind the notion of cost effectiveness of SBC investments. So next, do you see yourself using the business case model tool in your work? It looks like the majority of those of you responding will use it either right away, which is great, or maybe later as you work through your program. And so, as Nicole said, there's lots of resources available to you through a how-to video and the tool. And so you can access all of those when you're ready to use it. Lots of resources and tools available to you. And finally, for this, in a short sentence, can you tell us what you see as the biggest challenge to understanding cost effectiveness of SBC for family planning? So you can type that short sentence and press submit, and you'll see the results here on the screen. Great, lots of different and diverse issues. And I think some of these tools help to address some of these. And early on, Nicole, and I think you're on the line live, but early on, I saw a concern around reluctance of partners to share financial data. And I wonder if we can talk a little bit about how you've been thinking about that through breakthrough research and through your work at Amir.
Sure. Hi, everyone. That is something that we encounter a lot with our work, people's reluctance to sort of share SBC costing data or their expenditures. I think often while we're not engaging in an audit or anything like that, it often feels like that, and people tend to be concerned around privacy issues, around salary information, et cetera. So we've done a lot of, I think, brainstorming around how to make people more comfortable around this. We've developed some internal tools to help mask any type of salary information sharing. But really, I think part of it is understanding what we're trying to do and cultivating a culture around sort of trust and faith in the system, that this isn't going to be used to penalize people, but more for a learning experience. So I think that that's something I've really taken from this project, and I'm hoping we'll move forward.
Great, thanks, Nicole, and thank you to all of you for your feedback. We're going to turn back now to our next key message, followed by several breakthrough research developed tools you can use.
Costing and cost effectiveness analyses are doable, and resources on methodologies and tools you can use are available. Breakthrough Research has developed several resources that work in concert to provide you with tools you'll need to better understand the costs of SBC for family planning. First, the guidelines for costing SBC health interventions outline the methodological principles of SBC costing. Next, a pathway to SBC impact tool allows you to explore the link between different SBC approaches and increases in MCPR to help you think about which approaches you might want to consider for your program. Following that, an SBC costing tool helps to understand how much these SBC approaches might cost. And finally, an SBC costing community of practice connects you with others, allows you to ask questions and see answers, tips and advice, and a series of community practice briefs dives into specific costing questions. To hear a little more about each of these, let's first turn things over to Jim and the guidelines for costing SBC health interventions.
Hello, my name is Jim Rosen from Avenir Health. This session is on the guidelines for costing SBC health interventions. These guidelines provide a framework for estimating the costs of interventions for SBC and outline uses for different types of audiences, such as cost analysts themselves, implementing partners commissioning an SBC study, donors supporting costing studies, individuals using cost estimates generated from other settings, and journal editors reviewing an SBC costing study. The guidelines lay out a consistent set of methodological principles that reflect best practice and that could underpin any SBC costing effort. These 17 principles are organized into 4 categories. 1. Design. 2. Measurement. 3. Pricing and valuation. And 4. Analysis and reporting. Each principle begins with a link to a reference case and contains best practice recommendations, illustrating concepts with SBC specific examples and referencing how real-life costing exercises have applied these principles. Background sections and appendices provide readers with additional information. Although technical in nature, the SBC costing guidelines aim to be accessible to a non-economist audience. These guidelines aim to increase the quantity and quality of SBC costing information by encouraging cost analysts to conduct costing studies based on widely accepted methodological principles. We expect the SBC costing guidelines to result in well-designed studies. One of the most important lessons is to plan for SBC costing studies early in the research process in order to properly estimate SBC costs. Scan the QR code to access the guidelines and start applying them to your work.
Thank you, Jim. And now back over to Michelle to share a tool you can use to explore pathways to SBC impact.
Hi, this is Michelle Weinberger with Avenir Health, and I'll be sharing work on an interactive graphic that explores pathways to impact for SBC for family planning. The amount that SBC interventions can increase modern contraceptive use depends on existing behaviors and attitudes, the effectiveness of the SBC interventions, and how much the interventions are scaled up. We developed an interactive graphic to allow advocates to explore and visualize these dynamics in a simple way. The graphic can be used to advocate for increased SBC investments and to start conversations about the need to prioritize SBC investments based on country context. Here is the interactive graphic. This graphic is meant to be illustrative rather than showing data for a specific country, but it lets you explore how changes in the initial MCPR, the starting levels of attitude and communication associated with family planning, and the level of intervention scale-up affects overall increases in contraceptive use. These factors can be changed in the box above the graphic. For example, if we change the level of intervention scale-up from moderate to high, we can see the resulting increase in modern contraceptive use increases from 4 points to 9 points. In this graphic, the thickness of the lines connecting the boxes represents the magnitude of the impact of SBC on increasing contraceptive use. You can hover over specific interventions to isolate the impact of the intervention on intermediate outcomes and then on the subsequent impact of those outcomes on MCPR. For example, here we're highlighting the impact of mass media on increasing MCPR and can see that the largest impact, indicated by the thickest line, is through the pathway of increasing approval of family planning. If instead we hover over interpersonal communication, we can see the pathway to impact from this intervention highlighted. Scan this QR code to begin exploring the pathway to SBC impact via our interactive graphic.
Thank you, Michelle. And over to Lori to share another tool you can use to support costing efforts in your program.
Hello, this is Lori Bollinger, and I will be reviewing the SBC costing tool. The SBC costing tool is based on an analysis of the SBC unit costs identified in the literature. It can be used to assess SBC implementers, donors, and researchers with planning and budgeting. When using the tool, users select the characteristics of an SBC intervention to generate a range of estimated unit costs. These can then be used to either estimate the potential reach of an intervention based on a given budget, or to estimate the intervention budget based on an intended reach. A built-in user guide walks the user through the 5 simple steps to estimate either an intervention reach or budget. In this example, we've used the costing tool to estimate the budget of an SBC campaign in Mali that would include 4 types of SBC interventions of varying intensities. This estimates a campaign budget of just under $3 million or up to $4.6 million if costs for each of these activities runs on the high end of those found in the literature. Although this tool does not tell you about program cost effectiveness, it can help implementers work to build feasible program budgets and can help foster a conversation between programmers and donors about expectations. To start using the SBC costing tool, use the QR code here. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. The project believes strongly in fostering a community of practice to continue to strengthen the evidence base for costing for family planning SBC, and in developing and making available and accessible needed tools and resources. To support implementing partners and others working on costing of SBC approaches, including those supporting family planning programs, Breakthrough Research has brought together and nurtured a community of practice around SBC costing. The community of practice is connected on Springboard, which provides a platform for engagement, a space for questions and answers, and allows for sharing of resources. These resources include a series of briefs that highlight important specific issues and practices for SBC costing. Today, we'll provide a very high-level tour of some of these resource briefs. You can use the links that will be shared to explore more about each topic. The first Community of Practice brief, Costing SBC Programming, the Role of the Denominator, examines 3 types of denominators to inform SBC researchers and implementers on the most appropriate denominators for an SBC costing study: program outputs, health behaviors, or health impacts, and provides links to the tools that can help with calculating important cost metrics. A second Community of Practice brief, Understanding the Costs of SBC Social Media Interventions, examines 3 denominators to consider when delivering SBC using social media. This second brief will help others work towards filling the evidence gap identified during our review of the literature, which found few costing studies related to new and changing technology, such as social media for SBC. A third brief, Capturing the Startup Costs Associated with SBC Interventions, examines how to capture initial startup costs. A successful SBC intervention requires the investment of time and resources in the intervention's initial startup phase, which is defined as the time from the project initiation until the project begins broad implementation. When conducting a costing of an SBC intervention, it's useful to capture these initial costs separately and allocate them appropriately over the life of the intervention. By examining startup costs separately, the post-startup implementation costs can be forecasted more accurately for future budgeting purposes and for determining the appropriate costs for scaling up interventions. A fourth Community of Practice brief, Are Integrated SBC Interventions Cost-Effective? A Methodological Approach, outlines methodological steps for examining the cost-effectiveness of integrated SBC, which can be useful when family planning is part of an integrated program. The brief outlines 7 steps. First, establish the research question. Second, specify the study design. Third, calculate program costs. Fourth, calculate program impact. Fifth, examine the incremental cost-effectiveness ratio, or the metric that's used in conjunction with GDP thresholds to determine cost-effectiveness. Sixth, conduct sensitivity analyses. And finally, communicate the results. The brief also provides a hypothetical example applying these 7 steps. These have just been highlights of what you can learn through the costing community of practice. You can use this QR code to learn more and to join the community of practice.
So a few more questions to hear from you all using Mentimeter. So if you can please go back to where you left off, or if you need to rejoin us, go to menti.com and enter the code or use the QR code to take you to Mentimeter. Great, I see thumbs up that people are rejoining us on Mentimeter. So now that you've heard about some of these tools that you can use to foster a community of practice around costing for SBC for family planning, can you place a dot next to the tool you see yourself using in your own work most immediately? Great. It looks like we have blue dots on all 4 of those tools. And so the tools have all been shared as links in the chat. And we look forward to seeing you apply and adapt those tools and use them in your own work. Thank you again so much for your participation via Mentimeter. As usual, please keep it close by. We'll use it one more time as part of this webinar. But for now, let's head back over to look towards the future of costing for SBC for family planning.
Now that we've shared some of the state-of-the-art evidence and tools you can use, let's look forward to the future and what we can do to continue to strengthen and advance costing for family planning SBC. We've identified several calls to action for furthering evidence and understanding of costing for SBC for family planning. For SBC programs or family planning programs incorporating SBC approaches, we urge you to determine at the outset if a cost-effectiveness analysis is planned, which necessitates including costing in your program. This includes deciding what your denominator is going to be, using the SBC Costing Community of Practice, the role of the denominator brief for guidance. This will help to ensure you have what you need for costing exercises or cost-effectiveness analyses you have planned. Researchers and those working on monitoring and evaluation should work toward improving the capture of program impact data that allows for cost-effectiveness analyses of integrated programs, but also recognize that not all the benefits from SBC interventions may be easily captured in a common denominator. Understanding which impacts are and are not incorporated into the denominator is important, particularly when examining cost effectiveness across different health areas. And 3 calls to action for donors. First, we encourage you to provide programs with specific requirements for how costing should be done using the guidelines for costing social and behavior change health interventions. The guidelines outline the core methodological principles as well as different viable approaches. Donors should be clear with grantees what their specifications are for costing so that programs set themselves up for success at the outset to answer costing questions. We also encourage cross-donor communication about this so that we are collectively and systematically building the evidence base. Second, it's important to be realistic about what cost-effectiveness questions currently can and cannot be answered, and to exercise caution about benchmarking. While we're making great strides in costing for family planning SBC, there are still unanswered questions, such as which SBC approaches are most cost-effective in different contexts. At this stage in our understanding of cost effectiveness for family planning SBC, we urge donors to exhibit caution about prematurely benchmarking programs, which may stifle progress in growing the knowledge base on this topic. And finally, when considering support for programs, work toward building local organizational capacity for managing expenditure reporting, and champion efforts to improve the reporting of SBC expenditures among all implementing organizations.
So with these calls to action in mind, we'll now spend the next few minutes with some reflections on how to advance these calls. And I'm thrilled that we have Julianne Weiss, Senior Social Science Advisor at USAID in the Office of PRH, the Research Technology and Utilization Division, joining us for this. Julianne, now that we've heard these calls to action, we really welcome your reflections on how donors like USAID and others can take these calls to action and drive them forward, and why it's important to do so from a donor perspective.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you so much to the entire Breakthrough Research team. I think you should be really congratulated and proud of this work. It's extremely useful and helpful across the board. And, you know, speaking from my perspective, I I see there's a few things moving forward. The first is to use this evidence and these tools and not let all of this hard work sort of melt away and, you know, invest in something new, but really use what research has been done. We also want to be using these tools across a broad array of our programming. So at USAID, we have country bilateral programs, we have global programs, we have, you know, so many different operating units that are investing in social and behavior change that can start using these tools to better understand the cost effectiveness and costing of their interventions. So this requires us all to sort of socialize the tools, get familiar with them ourselves, and then, you know, bring them up in all of our sort of dealings with other missions and operating units and implementing partners and all of that. So I really want to emphasize that sort of research utilization piece. And then if we can use these tools, then moving forward, we'll have even more evidence generated, which is, again, so important when we're thinking about social and behavior change, which is often the sort of what is dropped off when you have a family planning or health program investment. We do the service delivery, we get the commodities, and then, oh, if we have some left over, we might do a little bit of, you know, SBCC. But this work really shows that if we are intentional from the outset, and you know, invest across the health system, across the community, and really work at both sort of supply and demand issues around health behaviors, then we'll have a much greater impact. So again, really appreciate all of this work and excited for all of us to keep using these tools moving forward in our programming.
Thanks so much, Julianne. Really nice to hear that reflection on the calls to action, and thank you for the kind words. We're really proud of these tools and hope that you all put them to use, and we look forward to seeing that. So for today, a final visit to Mentimeter. So as usual, please go back to where you left off, or if you need to rejoin us, go to menti.com, enter the code, or scan the QR code to take you to Mentimeter. Great, looks like we're back over on Mentimeter. Thanks so much for continuing to make use of that thumbs up to let us know that you've connected. So as a final question for today, in one word, and I know one word can be hard, but one word, what do you hope is next for costing for family planning SBC? Great, I see there's still words coming in as our word cloud is dynamic and changing, and we'll use this to inform our upcoming discussion and Q&A with the presenters that you've heard from today. So if you have a question about what's been shared, please do go ahead and post that question in the chat, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. And follow up with answers to any questions that we might not be able to get to today, although we do have time today. And so before diving into the questions that have come into the chat, I wanted to use this word cloud and open it up. Nicole or Lori, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on On how this word cloud is shaping up, it looks like the big word is more and application. I know you both have been thinking a lot about what's next for costing for family planning SBC, and so just wanted to see if you had a quick reaction to how this word cloud is shaping up from our webinar participants.
Yeah, I can start, and then Laura, you can chime in if you'd like. I think I totally agree with this word cloud and application and more. I think what we've tried to do with the business cases, with the costing tool and the repository, is really get our arms around what is available and try to put those pieces together. What data do we have already? Because there already is a lot of evidence around the impact. And there is some evidence around like the costs. I mean, not evidence, but there's some data on the costs. But it would be a lot richer in terms of if we get more of those estimates, that we can use that data then more to improve the modeling, but also really more importantly, to get a better handle on what do these different interventions cost, and how are they impacting, and looking at those cost effectiveness. So just more work in this area. I think it really is at a nascent stage, and there's a lot of potential and a lot of learning to be done. Laura, do you have anything to add?
I see people really interested in kind of application and planning. And I guess I would like to emphasize this SBC costing tool. So if for family planning, if you're working with CIPs, so cost implementation plans, a lot of times you have the commodities costs, you have the service delivery costs, more or less. But a lot of times those SBC interventions are a little bit fuzzier in terms of what the intervention might look like. You might use costs from prior years to estimate going forward, which may not be the most accurate, but it's like the best you can do. So I guess I would try to emphasize this little SBC costing tool where, you know, you can choose, I don't even know if it's worth pulling it up. You can choose your health area. So there's family planning, there's HIV, there's other health areas as well. And then you can choose the reach, you can choose the provider, you can choose the country, and then it gives you a range of the unit cost. So there's an average, and then there's a low and a high. So at least it gives you a better idea of, based on the literature, based on this analysis, which is going to actually coming out in +1 in a little bit, an idea of what a reasonable cost might look like. So let me stop there.
Thanks, Lori, and thanks, Nicole, for those reflections on what our webinar participants want to see more of, which is more of this, an application, which is great. So, again, if you have any other questions, please do go ahead and post those into the chat. I know that some questions have come in as the presentations were going on, so I'm going to try and get to some of those and ask folks on the line to respond to those. And the first question I see is, it says this model is really about SBCC, for example, or in other words, SBC through various communication channels, not other methods of SBC beyond communication. Is that correct?
I can handle that one. Yes, I think that is correct. And largely it's because the models are a literature-based model. And you could go to the project document if you want and see around all our methodology, but there had to be a certain amount of evidence in order for us to include the intervention in our model. And for some of the non-SBC types of interventions coming in, there just wasn't enough existing evidence on the impact or the costs in order to be able to link those in with the models. There's some of them, you know, we started to see some of that information trickle in, but I think this speaks to kind of what I mentioned further is I feel like this field has a lot of opportunity for growth and new learning, especially when we're talking about newer forms of SBC, and what do those impacts look like? What do those costs look like? And more importantly, what are those cost effectiveness when you put them together?
Great, thanks. And I see another question suggesting that all this documentation be translated and shared also in French. And that's absolutely correct. And some of these, particularly the business case applications, have been translated into French. And the broader set of documentation is in process and will be available in French, including the guidelines and the full business case. And so be on the lookout through our newsletter or our social media avenues, and we'll share those translated tools just as soon as they are available. And we look forward to seeing those applied in different contexts, including West and Central Africa. So one other question that I know, Nicole, you've been thinking about is sort of how this work fits into the move towards localization of donor funding and sustainability, and wanted to see if you wanted to say a little bit about how you've been thinking about that, and it relates to that last call to action around supporting the capacity building for expenditure reporting. And so invite you to share some thoughts on that.
Great. Yeah, I can start and others can chime in. Yeah, I think that, getting an understanding of the costs and cost effectiveness of SBC programs, I think is really critical for moving forward to the next stage and increasing localization. And that starts by sharing and strengthening all of our abilities to do this type of work, which is why we've created a lot of these products to really try to help work going forward. But once we have a better handle on, what are the costs of these interventions, what does it take, how much funding is needed to pull them forward, and what is the most cost-effective allocation of our resources, I really feel like it will help enable the sustainability and that push towards localization. But I'm really keen to get other people's thoughts as well.
I can't see if anyone is going to unmute themselves, but if there aren't any other thoughts, or if you have thoughts to please put in the chat, that would be great. I think there's lots of thinking to do on this, and think about how those two things come together. One other thing I was reflecting on, thinking back towards our Mentimeter around some of the challenges that you all shared with us around cost effectiveness. And I think we've talked a lot about getting the costing piece right and understanding our costs. But I noticed that some of the challenges were around FP data and impact data. And I know, Nicole, you all at Avenir through Breakthrough Research have been working on our cost effectiveness analyses of SBC programs in Niger and Nigeria, and just wanted to see if you wanted to reflect on sort of there's dual importance. You got to get the costs right, but it's hard to do anything with those costs if you don't have the subsequent impact measures.
Yeah, agreed. I think when I think about what we do with cost effectiveness is we, calculate what we call the incremental cost effectiveness ratio, or ICER. And that is the costs, which we've talked a lot about today, as the numerator, and some measure of our impact as our denominator. And then you compare those to something in order to assess what's the best approach or what is cost effective. And there are challenges, though, to all those pieces. There's a lot of challenges around calculating the costs, but there's certainly surmountable challenges. There are also, as I think a lot of people know here, there's a lot of challenges around calculating the impact around attribution of health behavior change due to SBC. I think that's the big one that, is something for our M&E or our evaluation experts that are always trying to work and trying to isolate that in order to get that tangible measure of impact. And then, as we've mentioned before, there's sort of that comparison. And it can, you have to sort of have a very similar approach in order to compare to ICERs. This is one of the reasons why we use those WHO established thresholds based on the DALI averted, because it eliminates all the variability one might have in calculating their cost and impact to make a direct comparison between two ICERs challenging. So these are all things I think that can be worked on, and we can generate a more consistent approach as we go forward to kind of help us answer some of these other questions around cost effectiveness. Did that address I think your general question, Amanda?
Yeah, thank you. Great. And I see one more question that's come in from the chat. I'm not quite sure what it's referring to, but I'll read the last question out. If there are any other similar studies, and if so, how consistent are the findings? Again, not sure what it's quite referring to, but and Nicole, sorry to ask. So many of you, or Lori, please do chime in. I think if we think more broadly about that review in the literature, if you could speak to a little bit about sort of how consistent you found some of this work in both costing and on both the cost side and the input side.
I mean, certainly there's been a ton of work done in SBC impact and costs. I think, to my knowledge, this is the first time we've put it all together, putting all that literature together on the impact side, on the cost side, to build a model of cost effectiveness. I could be wrong, there could be other things out there, but we've spent a lot of time in this area, and I feel like if there was something that had been done a while ago, we would be aware of it. But please feel free to interject other resources. I'm always looking for more ideas. So I think if it's speaking to that, I think this is the first time that real synthesis has been done. But there is also, a lot of different types of cost effectiveness studies that have been out there. And that's something that we're excited to see more cost effectiveness looking at SBC. Once we get into some of these newer areas, different types of SBC, looking at integrated SBC, or just sort of the new studies that we've looked at, et cetera, that's sort of, there's just a ton of potential work out there that can be done. So I really encourage people to think about that moving forward.
And that was great, Nicole. And this is Lori. If I could just add, I think the key point was actually something you said at the very beginning, which is bringing together all of the literature on impact and costs, combining them to form this general model, I think is in fact, and then doing the calculations to do the return on investment, cost effectiveness ratio overall. I do think this is the first time it has been done. So usually a cost effectiveness analysis in this area would be over a specific intervention. So here the value added is really bringing everything together and providing a unified picture.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lori. And that sometimes questions come up sort of like, so is all SBC cost effective? And the answer is of course not, right? If it's not effective, then it wouldn't be cost effective. But really what our business case has looked at is sort of looking at the field overall, matching up that median impact with those median costs to see how is the field doing in terms of our cost effectiveness. And that's excellent point, Lori, about that's sort of what we've brought with this, as well as a way to sort of use these models to help look at specific potential interventions or thinking about specific types of SBC.
And since we have a little extra time, if I could just add to that, and a lot of times we get a question, well, which is more cost effective, IPC or mass media? And although people don't like to hear the answer, it's like, it depends, right? It depends on the costs, it depends on the program, it depends on the setting. Sometimes something is more or less, relatively more cost effective, relatively less cost effective. It's all relative. But I do think the important message is overall, these interventions are basically either cost effective or highly cost effective. So you can go back and forth between specific program designs, but generally speaking, SBC we have found to be cost effective across several health areas.
Thanks, Lori. Great point and great questions. I think we hear a lot when we share this work. So thank you for that. If there are any other questions, please post them in the chat. We'll make sure that we follow up with those in our follow-up email to the webinar. But for now, I want to thank everybody so much for an engaging discussion and for being with us for this hour and a half. You can use this QR code to access an accompanying legacy resource document. It'll be shared as a link in the chat right now and by email as follow-up to this webinar. But before we close, I'd like to turn it back over to Laura Reichenbach for some final words as project director as we close out this series of legacy and learning events. And so over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Amanda. And thank you to Lisa Godwin and Julianne Weiss and all of the presenters and participants in today's excellent webinar. This costing webinar marks the end of Breakthrough Research's Global Legacy and Learning webinar series that have highlighted some of the projects learning over the past 6 years in each of our 4 technical legacy areas of SBC measurement, provider behavior change, SBC in the enabling environment, and costing. We have had over 600 participants attend these legacy and learning webinars, and many of you may have participated in more than one. For those of you who haven't, I encourage you to use the link that will be shared in the chat to access the recordings of the previous webinars and review the legacy and supporting documents and resources that were produced for each of them. While each webinar delved into a different area of evidence for SBC and family planning, they each reflect the project's approach to share evidence and learning that helps to ensure that SBC programs are based in what works, elevates the impact of evidence-based SBC programs, and puts evidence into practice. These webinars have been intended for programmers, researchers, development partners, and donors, and designed to be an interactive learning opportunity. An important contribution of the project has been the design and production of a range of practical tools that address the different SBC programmatic needs of our different intended audiences. Whether you want to learn more about how to measure provider attitudes using the Provider Authoritarian Attitude Scale, how to use a theory of change to monitor and evaluate SBC programs, or how to use social listening and social media monitoring approaches as an evaluation tool for SBC programs, there is a wide range of practical tools developed as part of the project. We do look forward to seeing these tools and applications used and adapted to your own contexts and needs. In these webinars, you have also heard from many of the researchers who designed and carried out the research that produced new and compelling evidence that answer a range of research questions related to SBC programming. Many of these questions have been informed by the 2 research and learning agendas developed at the beginning of the project. One for provider behavior change program, and the other for integrated SBC programming. Our engagement with all of you through these webinars, as well as with others, suggests that these research and learning agendas remain salient, and we hope that they will continue to be useful in informing investment in further evidence generation for SBC programming. Before we close, I want to extend the project's sincerest appreciation to USAID and specifically to our AOR team, Lindsay Swisher and Angie Brasington, for their support of Breakthrough Research. While this is the last of our global webinars and the project will close in July of this year, please do remain on the lookout for some remaining project products, which include forthcoming reports, blogs, and manuscripts. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to everyone. We look forward to seeing you use these links and have a great rest of your day wherever you are. Thank you.